Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin in China, where the country has launched the Zhenzhou 16 manned spaceship, sending 3 astronauts to its space station combination for a 5-month mission. The spaceship blasted off this morning from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China. The astronauts will conduct large-scale in-orbit tests and experiments in various fields as planned. They are expected to make high-level scientific achievements in the study of quantum phenomena, high-precision space-time frequency systems, the verification of general relativity, and the origin of life. This is China's first crewed space flight mission, with the participation of 3 types of astronauts. The Zhenzhou 16 mission is the first manned mission after China's space station entered the stage of application and development. Meanwhile, a former astronaut with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, Donald Thomas, has hailed the rapid development of China's space program, saying it's all for the greater international cooperation in space, regardless of the political differences on the ground. In a recent interview, Mr. Thomas, a veteran of 4 space shuttle missions, said he has been keeping a keen eye on China's space exploration efforts over the years. During his space career, he works closely with scientists and peers from all around the world, noting the many years of friendship and cooperation between U.S. and Russian astronauts on board the International Space Station.
I've been carefully watching the Chinese space program probably for the last 10 years. When the U-2 rover was on the moon, that's when I started watching, and I've just watched the growth of it, and the accomplishments have amazed me. Particularly Chang'e 5, bringing back some lunar soil, totally successful mission. And the manned spaceflight program has been so rapid that it really impressed me how quickly they've developed in building of the Tiangong space station. I'm all for peaceful purposes of space, and that's what I want to see. I've seen the competitive part of space during the space race. I've seen the cooperative part, and I prefer the cooperative, because even though we have political differences down here on Earth, in space we work together and we have friendships. We, the United States, have been working with the Russians for 30 years or more, on the International Space Station. And even though politically on the ground we are hitting heads, in space we're a team.
Well, search and rescue teams working throughout the night have brought out another victim from an apartment building that collapsed in Davenport, Iowa. The city's mayor, Mike Mattson, and Davenport Fire Chief Michael Carlston told reporters they believe the incident will end without fatalities. A center section of the 6-story building with 84 apartments and businesses collapsed for unknown reasons, prompting an immediate rescue effort that pulled 7 people from the multiple floors of the building. Another dozen people walked out on their own. The 4 corners of the building remained standing, but a section of the building collapsed on one side, leaving support beams dangling from upper floors and a pile of rubble below. And 9 people have been injured after a gunfire erupted alongside a beachside in Hollywood, Florida, sending people running for cover along the crowded beach during the Memorial Day holiday in the United States. Police spokesperson Deanna Betsnashi said several of those wounded were taken to a children's hospital, adding that 4 minors aged between 1 and 17 were hit, along with 5 adults between ages 25 and 65. According to authorities, the shooting happened shortly before 7 p.m. when a fight broke out and at least 1 gun was pulled out and shots were fired. At least 1 person is in custody, and police are still searching for more possible suspects. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden honored the lives of fallen soldiers during a Memorial Day ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. Mr. Biden said all Americans had a responsibility towards those who died so the nation might live, and highlighted his administration's commitment to supporting veterans. Ahead of his speech, the U.S. president laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier and bowed his head in prayer. He was accompanied by Vice President Kamala Harris and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin.
Today, we once again gather in this sacred place at this solemn hour to honor fallen heroes. To once again stand amid the rows and rows of marble stones and bear witness to the brave women and men who served and sacrificed for our freedom and for our future. Those who died so our nation might live. As a nation, and people have heard me say this for a long time, as a nation, we have many obligations. But I believe in every fiber of my being, we have only one truly sacred obligation: to prepare those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home and when they don't. It's a sacred obligation, not based on party or politics, but on a promise to unite all of us. There's nothing more important, nothing more sacred, nothing more American.
Our Washington correspondent Maria Baird joins us for more. Maria, first speak to us about the shooting in Florida. What more do we know?
What we know at this time that the suspect has been detained, so we do know that. We know there was a lot of police presence down in the Hollywood, Florida area. This is a popular destination during the Memorial Day holiday weekend. Many families are going to the beach. Many families are enjoying vacation. So this was definitely what would be considered quite a surprise. But more importantly, this is just another sign that America has quite a long way to go as it works toward eradicating gun violence.
Have the authorities been able, to learn more on what led to the fighting and how this quickly escalated?
Well, unfortunately, what they know is that it looks like it was two groups of individuals that ran into each other and seemed to have some sort of a retaliatory communication, which then led to what we saw as gunfire. So it seems that this was something that had nothing to do with someone just going out and having a mental illness breakdown or any other type of motive that was related to racial bias. It seems that this was actually something between two groups of individuals. So this is, I think, another example, as you're showing the video of the people fighting and running. This is just another example of where there is going to be required additional need for allowing policing to occur throughout the U.S., but also ensuring that police are able to de-escalate situations before such gunfire occurs.
And I know we've been talking about U.S. President Joe Biden's call for gun control, but how effectively is this panning out in Congress?
Well, the right to bear arms has been a long-standing debate in the U.S., especially over the past 10 to 15 years, or even going back to the Brady bills in the 80s. And so this has been something that I think many congressional members have been working for many years to try to address. At this time, what we see is that we have very distinct parties between the Republican and Democrats, and those Republicans who are believing in the right to bear arms, and unfortunately it's being tied into other political issues as we look at the debt ceiling and other challenges that America is facing, that the reality of people losing their lives has not become the forefront, I think, of this debate around gun violence. I think that any congressional member, wherever they sit, would agree that gun violence needs to be eradicated in the U.S. The question is, how do we go about that? Democrats are heavily pushing toward restriction on firearms, but many Republicans are not seeing that as being the main way and the root of the cause toward eradicating the gun violence.
And so it happened on a day that, Americans had a bank holiday, where it was Memorial Day. We saw the president lay a wreath, say a prayer, alongside many people he asked to remember the fallen and pray for their families. How was the mood generally in the United States on Memorial Day?
Generally, Memorial Day is a holiday, as you mentioned. It's a time to remember those who have given their lives for our country, for the United States, and those who might have, been injured in the line of duty, or those who have just taken out, many years of their life to make sure that they are honoring their country and they're serving their country. So it's a time of real service, reflection, honor. And I think that our president has been very clear, as we know, the unknown soldiers, that ceremony that occurs each and every Memorial Day is very dear and sacred to the American people. And it's just a sign of how many soldiers actually lose their lives on the line of duty, but are never able to be brought back home and having a proper burial ceremony. So this is a symbol of coming together as a country. It's a time of reflection and a time of reverence and respect for those who've given their life for the country.
Right, Maria, thanks for the updates on the stories. And here in Africa, dozens of protesters have clashed with police in Senegal's capital, Dakar, after lawmakers were blocked from visiting the home of a prominent opposition politician, Ousmane Sonko, who's on trial for separate charges of rape and libel. Police fired tear gas at groups of demonstrators who built makeshift barricades along one of Dakar's main highways. In one neighborhood, cars were gutted by fire and the ministerial building set ablaze. It's the latest round of months of unrest triggered by President Macky Sall's refusal to rule out running for a third term. The opposition is also protesting court cases involving Mr. Sonko, who denies wrongdoing and says the charges are aimed at excluding him from running for president next February. Over in Sudan, where warring sides have agreed to extend a shaky ceasefire after coming under pressure from mediators, the 5-day truce extension between Sudan's military and its rival, the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, was announced in a joint statement by Saudi Arabia and the United States. On the last day of the old ceasefire, clashes rocked the capital, Khartoum. Both sides had used the last 7 days to resupply and reinforce their positions in anticipation of new fighting. The fighting has killed at least 866 civilians and wounded thousands more. Meanwhile, the United States and Saudi Arabia have welcomed the extension of the ceasefire deal between Sudan's warring military factions for another 5 days. Washington and Riyadh announced the latest deal, as well as brokering the previous week-long truce. In a joint statement, they acknowledged that the ceasefire had not been fully observed, but said it allows the delivery of aid to 2 million people in Sudan. The UN World Food Programme said the relative lull in fighting had allowed it to send supplies to residents trapped in the capital, Khartoum, for the first time since fighting erupted 6 weeks ago. Meanwhile, the head of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, has called for an immediate ceasefire between both sides of the ongoing conflict in Sudan to create conditions for humanitarian access to conflict-afflicted areas. Mr. Grandi said humanitarian aid agencies now stand ready to provide assistance to the people of Sudan, but the real solution lies in the hands of both sides in the conflict. He further urged the warring parties to act in the interest of the country and the people in a bid to ease the humanitarian disaster triggered by the conflict. Residents in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, and nearby cities are pessimistic about the peace prospects, even though the heavy fighting between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has abated. In the greater capital area, which consists of Khartoum and Omdurman and Khartoum North, the situation has improved from what it was in previous days, even though sporadic artillery fire could still be heard. The deadly unrest broke out on April the 15th in Sudan's capital and adjoining cities. The crisis stems from a disagreement over the integration of a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces into Sudan's army as part of a transition towards civilian rule. And when war engulfed Sudan's capital last month, it quickly spread to the western Darfur region, reigniting an old conflict and sending a wave of refugees over the border into Chad. Sudan's health ministry says up to 510 people have been killed in the city of about 500,000. At least 250,000 people in West Darfur have been internally displaced, while another 90,000 have fled to Chad. The RSF has in the past rebuked individual soldiers for involvement in Janjaweed attacks, but accuses the army and allied militias of being behind the latest Darfur violence.
It's very difficult for us to document anything or even to have an accurate look on the situation in Darfur. Why? Because we haven't been able to work. My own colleagues right now are completely trapped in their home. And to tell you the truth, it's been now 5 days that there's been a complete communication blackout. No communications, no network is working. None of the three networks are working. We've been all trying to call our friends, to call our colleagues, and none of the phone calls are passing through. So this is also extremely difficult, right? Like what goes on in the darkness of this whole silence is terrifying, because we know that there's been basically a month of extreme violence. The violence in West Darfur is also committed by local armed groups as well, which are not represented right now in Jeddah. Ultimately, what is for us extremely important is that humanitarian access and humanitarian assistance is allowed to come in the country and to reach people in need. And right now, this is not the case. Even if there's been...
يبدو أنه قد فتح لكن أغلقوه مرة أخرى.
And coming up after the break, Chief Diplomatic Advisor to Ukraine's President Ihor Zorba says Ukraine peace plan is only a way to end the Russian war. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Sudanese residents have expressed concerns that continued intense fighting could shatter the slim hopes raised by a prolonged ceasefire agreed by the warring parties. Starting from Sunday, clashes between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces again broke out in Khartoum and Omdurman, shattering a fragile 7-day ceasefire they agreed to on May the 20th, which was aimed for the delivery of assistance and conditions for lasting peace. Smua residents expressed their hope for peace and stability, as war would only make the country exhausted.
There was clashes between the RSF and the SAF in North Bahri and here in North Omdurman. The army have used its heavy artillery in order to target the locations of RSF in North Bahri. There was also clashes in western and south Omdurman between both forces. Citizens there that I have spoken with reported hearing of sounds of gunfire and also sounds of shells from yesterday night until the early morning around the engineering corps in western Omdurman city.
And in the days after war erupted in Khartoum, Dr. Abir Abdullah rushed between rooms at Sudan's largest orphanage, trying to care for hundreds of babies and toddlers as the fighting kept all but a handful of staff away. Then came waves of deaths. There were the infants housed on the upper floors of the state-run orphanage known as Maigoma. According to the doctor, without enough staff to care for them, they succumbed to severe malnutrition and dehydration. 8 other people who have either visited the orphanage since the war began or have been in touch with other visitors say the conditions have deteriorated badly and deaths have spiked.
This is the call of help, humanity, peace and hope. Hope for normal and a better life for the orphans who are trapped in Khartoum because of the war and truth violation. I'm standing here in this situation for the second time, calling your conscience and compassion to save more than 300 children, their age between days and years, suffering every day from lack of feeding, supplement, proper medical care, and mental health support. Sadly, I witnessed most of their deaths and funerals. So, our message to the world, evacuate the orphans from Khartoum to a safe city with a safe pathway.
About 1 million people will have fled Sudan by October, and maybe conservative and conflict in the area increases the risk of people trafficking and spreading weapons across a fragile region. That's according to the head of the UN Refugee Agency, who adds that more than 350,000 people have already fled across Sudan's borders since the war between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces erupted on April the 15th, with most heading to Egypt, Chad, and South Sudan.
We're operating on a 6-month plan, which goes until, therefore, September, October, which foresees about 1 million people leaving the country, 800,000 Sudanese and 200,000 other nationalities that live in Sudan. But in a relatively short period of time, we have reached already in excess of 350,000. Doesn't seem to stop. This projection that in the next few months we'll reach these high figures may even be conservative at this point. At the beginning, I didn't believe it would be, but now I'm beginning to be worried. The collapse of law and order inside a big country will be the perfect fertile ground for human trafficking, which is already quite thriving in the east of the country, as we know very well. And now, with a lot of people desperate to move on, this will be very, very much a risk to be reckoned with. But not, as always, please, let's close all our borders. That's not the response, but addressing the causes of that. And finally, and this is not my expertise, but I think it's to be kept in mind, is the possibility that all the weapons that are now being circulating, spread out in fragile countries. We've seen it in Libya with the Sahel. We don't want a repeat of that, because that will be a multiplier of crisis and of humanitarian problems. Sicurezza molto forte.
When we return on the program, Australian art takes centre stage as Vivid Festival lights up in Sydney. Details in a moment. Please join us again. Welcome back. Usually a sport reserved for the affluent suburbs of Zimbabwe's major cities, rugby is making inroads into the countryside, where it offers a release from the woes of poverty, early marriages and unemployment, which have blighted the southern African country for decades. The sport is also bringing fame to members of the all-female Zimbabwe rugby team. Take a listen.
Bridget Magasu trudges down a dusty pathway as she makes haste to attend a rugby practice session at Zimbabwe Primary School in Domboshava, a poor rural neighborhood 40 kilometers north of Zimbabwe's capital, Harare. The 20-year-old is the first to arrive for the training session, clutching a rugby ball in hand while she patiently waits for other members of Zimbabwe's all-female rugby team. Team coach Takudzwa Ngirazi passes the ball around for practicing moves. Domboshava, a hub for transporting farm produce, has also become a hotspot for sex work.
I started off as a tag rugby club, then later developed into contact. The reason being, we wanted the girls to stay away from the streets. Looking at this place, it's a hotspot for sex work. So we try by all means to keep our girls away from that.
Zimbabwe's economy is weak. With the currency in free fall, a Zimbabwean $100 note is no longer enough to buy an egg. Jobs are scarce, pushing teenage girls into sex work, sometimes for as little as $2. Joining a rugby club hardly removes that economic imperative. However, organizers hope it will at least help tackle the boredom that prompts girls to hang out on the streets, where they might eventually be exposed to that world because they need money.
The mantra in the country these days is fighting drug abuse and substance abuse amongst the youths in our communities. So we feel that as Zimbabwe Rugby, we're also playing our part to get these kids to be busy if they're training 4 days a week and they have a game on a Saturday, it gives them very little time to think about anything else.
A few years ago, these young women, most from poor families, had never handled a rugby ball. Now the Zimbiru side, founded in 2016, are in a 15-team league. 4 of their players have been drafted into Zimbabwe's under-20 women's side, and a few have made the under-18 squad. Drill sessions include running, passing and scrummaging, and for energy, the girls chew sugarcane. All of this is done on a shoestring budget, owing to lack of financial support.
And finally on the program, the Sydney Opera House and other iconic city landmarks were immersed in an array of vibrant colors as part of the opening night of the annual Vivid Festival. In its 13th year, visitors and locals were mesmerized by the 2023 artistic illuminations. The Sydney Opera House was illuminated by artist John Olsen's paintings of Australian nature and landscapes, while the Museum of Contemporary Art featured the electric canvas installation by Indigenous artist Marie Clark. In a year when Australians are set to vote in a referendum to recognise its Indigenous peoples in the Constitution, visitors felt the Indigenous-inspired installations were quite important.
I love the festival. Sydney's a beautiful city, and this is such a surprise. I'm looking around at beautiful lights, all the people are having a good time. I mean, what a celebration, what a great way to just show off the city of Sydney, Australia.
It's amazing. Having a really great time, actually. It's very beautiful. Surprised how many people are out and about, but no, really great experience.
I think I've been to almost all of them except for 2. And it's spectacular because I like the art with the technology, and people don't like to go with me because I read every sign. I have to understand the technology behind and the concept of the work of art. It's just not all about the lights for me.
Museum of Contemporary Art was fantastic. I love the storytelling of country and of songline that runs through that installation. That was really special.
But we're about to make our way around that way, so we've not seen some of it yet. But yeah, it's absolutely an amazing experience. My mum is only here until Sunday. She extended her flight so that she could see this before she goes back to the UK. So yeah, it's a lovely experience for her as well.
Lovely experience indeed. Well, that's the show today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers. Bye for now.